In this title we have seen, right, the most interesting word which capture my attention is resilience, especially after COVID. This is one word which is rocking boardrooms, offices, even our kitchens. How to be resilient in today's world. Couple of days back, we had an outage. Yesterday, I was in the airport arguing with an airline employee about a missing bag. They were blaming the same outage which happened a week back. And I said, that story is over. You need to build a new story. And again, in that context itself, I realized that was an unplanned attack or an incident. But in today's world, somebody does a planned attack, where this world will be. The next thought process which brings to my mind is modern warfare. You saw what is playing in Ukraine. You also notice 90% of the weapon systems today designed in this world is becoming ineffective. It has no role to play, whether it's in the air, ground, or in the water. So modern warfare has completely changed. And the same applies to semiconductor industry, automotive industry. Everything is becoming software defined. Even aerospace industry is going in the same way. If you look at our country also is undergoing a massive transformation, which from a agriculture economy, we just bypassed the manufacturing phase, went into services, for which we are paying the price now. At least last couple of years, there is a thought process to bring back or bring up the manufacturing base. But we all know when you want to do manufacturing, it also throws up issues around quality, safety, security that differentiate our products in the global landscape. And even the defense sector, wherein recently, last year, MOD took a decision to invite private participation into standards development also. Of course, the industry is open to private participation. But first time they said we need private parties into the Indian defense standards development. Incidentally, I was the first private sector nominee invited to lead at least 2 subcommittees where we are doing industry outreach program next Tuesday in Bangalore inside Bharat Electronics in association with the industry and the community there. So there are a lot of things happening. In that context, this topic is very much relevant. We have 3 esteemed panelists with us. If you take a summary of their background, each one is unique. We have Srinivas coming from more of a semiconductor, embedded, security, connected world background. We have Rakesh, a hardcore railway guy, someone who has dedicated his entire life with railways. Very relevant for a country like India, where a lot more investments need to happen and safety is a question mark on our railway networks. We have someone like Andrew Banks, who probably you all heard from him in the morning, but I'm trying to extract some of his other phases, what he contributes in different committees, what as a country, how we could, because I believe a couple of years back, he even came to BIS representing, I think, probably Britain in our, because BIS also hosts sometimes ISO committee meetings. So that's a beauty, They've taken up this issue very seriously. So first I will turn towards Rakesh, from your life around rail systems. If you could tell us, the current global railway safety practices, how that is playing out, please.
Thanks, Shinto. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, safety, security, irrespective of the industry, are of prime importance, and railways are no means a second lagger. One of the most important aspects coming in from a rail industry perspective is the vast area or the network which we are covering. That becomes one of the hindrances in ensuring safety at all times. It doesn't mean that we are not doing it in a right way, but ensuring safety at all times, in all respects, across all periods of work is a bit taking a second seat, I would put it. There are multiple areas which needs to be concentrated on. One, as I said, the vast area and the network which it needs to be covered, specifically in context of Indian Railways. World over, probably they have a very limited area to cover, very limited length of the track to cover. So they have very quick turnaround times to make things get or set right. Whereas in terms of Indian context, the modernization of tracks, the signaling systems, the communication systems which are happening, and some kind of a government lethargy, I would put it, in implementing these measures is creating some kind of a trouble. Going by the standard, going by the certification process, going by the quality of the equipment, each and every supplier is doing its best to provide a better supply, better equipment into the system. But overall, when the integration part of it comes in, then there are some issues which are propping up, which are not allowing a fail-safe system to be operated. That said upon, people remember only the accidents most of the times, but we should also appreciate that lot of trains, lot of passengers are traversing through each and every day safely. So there are two aspects of it. One, lives of the passengers are dependent on it. So we have to be at most careful about implementing any change or any modification into it. Second thing is how we start upon from a bureaucratic perspective on modernizing the things and then getting all those things into perspective so that security is not compromised and safety is not compromised. World over, it's a different scenario. Indian Railways is a different scenario. Across the world, I would put it in a different way. Across the world, they take safety, security very seriously. They dwell into each and every problem, understand it in totality, and then try to learn something out of it. Here, most of the times, on the day of the accident, on the day of the issue cropping up, we talk a lot, but 2 days after, everybody forgets about it. That is the only issue which I see which should be improved upon. Or else, the systems, the functionality, the testing part of it, the validation, certification, everything is done according to the standards and norms, and each and every supplier adheres to it. So I don't see a problem coming out from a supplier ecosystem or a environment perspective. It's only people's attitude and it's only people's observance towards the issue which needs to change.
Good. The interesting part is last 2 years, we've been getting a lot of inquiries from the rail sector, and I was told that even the board has taken up training as a way of life. Every month, a lot of training programs they're doing on EN 508. That whole series is happening, and hopefully, some of these things will start producing results because
Absolutely,
awareness
yes.
and policy changes, pressure pull from all directions will make a difference. Coming back to Quest, I think you work Quest, in the railway practice. Some of the practices you guys follow, I know your audience is mostly global,
Yes.
If you could explain to us.
So Quest is a design services organization. So we support suppliers or OEMs across the globe. We work on different kinds of subsystems, electrical, mechanical, software, and train control management systems. I come from a transportation background, so I will only limit my discussion to that. Or else Quest supports on aerospace, communication, energy, and various other industries. From a transportation perspective, we rigorously follow all the certification processes. Every work which comes into us, Raghavendra was talking about the AIML and the testing which needs to be done, the verification which needs to be done, the requirements management aspect of it. So right from the start of the V cycle, where we start with the requirements management, till the end realization, whatever systems we are working on, irrespective of whether it's electrical, mechanical, or train control management systems, we ensure that the safety and security part of it is ensured. And we do all kinds of tests, crashworthiness tests, we do physical tests for the fire safety. We take vibration currencies. We do all 50128 and then RAMs, SIL level, signaling. So there are various kinds of teams who are working on it, and different teams are contributing towards the final end realization of the product. The important part of it is to understand how or what is the kind of value add which we are providing to the customer. So we take it as a complete work package. So the ownership comes on to us. irrespective of whatever output we give it to the customer, that is our baby. So it all falls upon the entire responsibility. So we have teams who separately work on verification, validation, testing, designs, safety design, system engineering. Altogether, it's a collaborative effort kind of thing, cross-functional teams working together to ensure that we give a functionally safe product.
Good, thank you. I will turn towards Srinivas, where we live in a world, actually, last week's issue itself is a classic example there, multiple entities, unrelated parties getting affected. Right? And he works predominantly in the semicon embedded space where we don't know what could go wrong. Right? And even a fridge at our home could be used to launch a cyber attack on a critical infrastructure. That's the world which we are living in. So I want your views on what's happening on the global space. If you could explain.
Yeah, thanks, Shinto, and good afternoon, everybody. So the embedded systems are billions, right? So there are 50, 100 billions, right? So every device has its own challenges, but underneath those devices are built by probably similar SoCs. The ASIC cards are not so much different because they are designed to do particular operations, processing cores. There's a memory, there's a bus architecture, and so the security aspects on that is very mature. I think over the time, there are a lot of leaps and bounds made in making sure that those interfaces and SoCs are pretty stabilized. Most of the vulnerabilities on the security side that we might encounter is on the firmware that runs on it and the software that utilizes on the interfaces that connects to it, right? And as an engineer, right, so I've gone through that. Whenever there is a security aspect that comes very late in the game, most of the time the engineers jump to solve the problem. We hear the requirements, here it is, okay, let's solve the functionality and go on with point-to-point. Time to release is a challenging aspect of it. So they discover the security aspect down the line, sometimes after the product gets released or when the system level testing is happening. Oh, there are vulnerabilities, someone can hack my product, get into it, the credentials are compromised and things like that. Then you go back and try to fix that, right? So then I think the challenge there is you have to fit in the existing design. You don't have a flexibility to redesign anything because time to market again. So those kind of challenges will make a lot of compromises in security building in the firmware. So one approach could be like diverse devices, but you have a large segment of the architects focus on like the traditional way, take the requirements, design what it is, but another set of designers build as independent of that, go do a bottom-up approach. Those guys doing the top-down designing, and these guys can take bottom-up approach, take down for this solution segment of this device, what is the security envelope? What is the best design I should do it? Regardless of where is it being used? How is my interfaces are protected? Can I have a fail-safe models in it? Can I have redundant systems in it? Right? So how many times we've seen that a mobile phone understand your owner, right? So if it lost and if you can hack the credentials or a fingerprint, you get in. The phone doesn't even know that. Did we build enough logic in that to understand the owner itself, like the behavioral thing? If someone used the phone for a year or device been used for a year, it understands the patterns, how it has been used. Now, if a new usages is completely orthogonal to that, it can sense intelligently something is wrong. So I need to divert the attention to the root trust, and the root trust can take care of the failover thing. So building a redundant system, a failover mechanism underneath the design is the core strategy to build a secure environment. So in our area of GNSS receivers, the current challenges that we have is on the signal side. We have the GNSS signal is the core thing. That's a trigger point, and how our devices process the signal to compute the positioning is the core of the business, right? So if the signal is bad, tampered, or spoofed by intentional or unintentional, your security is compromised, and your functionality is completely been compromised. So developing those algorithms to mitigate that understanding has been our challenge. So that's what we do to develop those algorithms, other than the core business of finding the positioning itself, to mitigate this, and in conjunction with user intervention, those kind of things, has given us a good results in implementing this. And the same problem, it is discovered later in the cycle, not in the beginning. So we have to do the catch up, develop the modules on top of an existing model, make sure that, and then the standard comes in, right? So if 2626 and other standard comes in, we have to fit into that. Existing code base built 30 years back, suddenly move to standards, not easy, right? So, and then you toss it to the engineer, they'll say, okay, is this another appetizer I need to try it? Because the standard is an extra work for me. I don't want to do that, or cutting corners there. So enforcing adoption of the standard is also been a pretty challenging for the embedded systems. But once they realize the value of that, because the security emphasis varies from device to device and sector to sector. And we cater, I mean, our Novotel itself cater to multiple sectors, like aerospace, to defense, to agriculture, surveying. So when it comes to customer like defense coming up, security goes paramount. And there we have to do customization to give a high secure and high level available system so the quality is maintained.
Good. So the summary, what you're saying is early adoption of security as a practice in the organization helps. And we do face the same problem. Sometimes, people ask, okay, test for security. For what? Because your design has not even considered it. You don't even have taken the security requirements.
It's not even top 5 priorities.
The security requirements are not identified. So without requirements, how are you going to test it? So I think that early adoption, early thought process is very much important. Education and enforcement, both,
And adopting the latest technologies that are up there, because even though you design security for today, the device usually lasts for a decade. When you make a device, the refrigerator you gave, nobody changed refrigerator every year, lasts for decades, right? And the vulnerabilities changes over the time. Am I foreseeing or am I chasing the vulnerability that comes up the air, or do I limit my vision, my design to what is it intended for? A refrigerator is intended for doing a certain function. Do I build enough redundant system or artificial intelligence in the device to make sure that no matter what intrusion comes, like just compare to a human body, right? Nobody designed the human body thinking that the COVID will come. But we have enough resistance and inherent checks and bounds that will mitigate those attacks, and then we safeguard ourselves and the device can function smoothly. So that kind of design thinking and designing for its own functionality and anticipating a future will give a better secure
Probably we'll
solution.
revisit this part. Protecting legacy systems is one of the biggest challenges every industry is facing, especially defense industry, because most of the systems designed decades back, the concept was not there. Security was not there in the picture at all. And today we cannot blame anybody for such a design, because nobody anticipated that such a situation will evolve over a period, right, where everything will get connected. And now you're putting about smartness also into that through AI.
Most of the revenue comes from legacy devices also.
That's a reality. Okay. And let me ask you one more question actually about your organization. What all things Hexagon does in this space?
So Hexagon, in a nutshell, is a company that translates all sensors, geospatial and industrial sensors, into solutions. Build intelligence to translate the data coming up from the sensor to intelligence. Whether it's a smart cities where we want to take geopositional data and connect to call data and where the emergencies are, connect to the solutions, or mining where the mining trucks provide solutions where the sensors are on the mining trucks and detect the auto detection of the drowsiness or maneuvering on the difficult terrain, and or on the ocean where you have drilling happening and the waves can drift your vessel apart. Am I getting the exact positioning where I'm supposed to drill, or it's been drifted apart? And that intelligence need to be built in it. And many such that industrial devices like we do piping designing, industrial segment, plant designing kind of thing. So it's a wide spectrum of the 8 broad divisions that Hexagon works on it, mostly on building those intelligent devices.
I think some of these things goes to our Indian space defense projects also.
Oh yeah. We have a lot of defense interactions, and the Indian defense is one of the bigger customers. So they take the positioning solutions on even the, I can't name some of the projects, but the big vessels and the militaries, they take the receiver cards and built and integrated solutions for maneuvering and tracking that.
Okay,
even the tankers that goes on the border,
Yep.
they have the devices that knows where they are. And if you're spoof, your tanker can be hijacked by the enemy on the border.
It's happening. It's
It is,
on the other
yeah.
side of the world. We are seeing this every day.
Exactly.
Okay, let me turn towards Andrew. Andrew brings a different expertise to this panel. He's a man who lives out of standards. So, Andrew, if you can share your thoughts on across the globe, in multiple industries, how the standards game is playing out. Because I do get a lot of complaints in the Indian context, at least. Standards blocks innovation, standards is a cost, standard is blah, 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 blah. So many allegations against standards also. So if you could share your thoughts on and globally how this has evolved and how it is helping industries also.
Well, contrary to popular belief, I don't spend all of my time on standards committees. I do have a day job as well, which is guiding companies to implement these standards. And the important part is early adoption. So with whether it's MISRA or testing standards or functional safety standards, it's adopt them early so they become just part of your development lifecycle. If you leave it right to the end, you've written all your code, and then you say, now I'm going to implement MISRA, you're going to have a problem. Because if you haven't written your code with the MISRA guidelines in mind, you are likely to have lots of violations because you won't have followed the rules. And the same with the functional safety world, whether it's automotive, aerospace, industrial, medical. A huge part of the standard requires the analysis you do up front. So again, building your device and then say, now I'm going to implement functional safety, well, you probably have to throw away most of what you've done. But sort of linking to what I was saying in my earlier talk, the other part is applying common sense. Now, I spoke with several people over lunch. The good Lord gave us one big, powerful brain up here. Let us think about what we're doing. Do not blindly follow a standard. Think about it. Understand what the requirements of the standard are. Understand what it's trying to protect against, and then implement those. And just picking up on 2 points from the previous speaker. In the cybersecurity world now, or in fact the vulnerability world, CWE has become the benchmark, and everything ultimately is being tagged with the weakness. So when something goes wrong, it's allocated a CVE, a common vulnerability enumeration, which is unique to a specific violation, specific use case. And then the CWEs are the underlying root cause. For the last 5, possibly 10 years, there have been very, very few new CWEs identified, except for where they're adding new technology. In other words, we already know what all the problems are. We know how to detect them, and yet we still fall over them. And, there's actually very little excuse other than it's not important. So, but adoption of standards, apply common sense, but understand what you're doing. And that's whether it's a national standard, a regional standard, an international standard.
Okay, good. I have one more question to you, Andrew. The concepts of, life cycle of standards from beginning to end. I'll come to a reason also why I'm asking this question, because in our country, we don't find many standards experts. When we call for people developing standards also, not many people come forward. And of course, they always find an excuse for not following standards, but when it comes to contributing, developing standards. But if you look at the history of any developed country, those countries came up by building brick by brick, putting standards and processes in every aspects of their life. Not only product development, even food safety, road safety, energy safety, everywhere you can have quality, safety, security standards, they building, or they adopt global standards. So if you could explain, how a life cycle of any standard, how it evolves, upgrade, and perish.
Typically, a new standard from the very start to it being published is about 5 years, of which the first 2.5 years is creating the standard, and then the last 2.5 years are various ballots and reviews. The standards world is very, very slow. The final ballots are of approximate 6-month duration each, and that dates back to when hard copies of the standard would be mailed out to each national body around the world, and you would meet in a room, you would write your comments, and then the answers would be mailed back. Today we have this magic thing called computers and the internet, and we receive the documents by email. We can submit our comments by email, but they still allow 6 months for each of these phases. So from when a working group feels that the standard is frozen, and that's what we call the working group draft, that then goes up to the subcommittee level. So in the software and systems engineering world, SC7. So BIS then email it around SC7 to all the contributors there, and each country gets to vote on it. And then all the feedback is given back to the working group. And then we have the final draft, which is another 6-month balloting period where all these comments can be made. At the draft version, comments can be technical or editorial. In the final one, you're only allowed to make editorial comments. Having said that, it is amazing what can be considered an editorial comment if the committee chair so wants. For example, in ISO 26262, in the first edition, there was some very, very substantive technical changes made after the final draft ballot. Lots of people who'd set up their organisation process were going, hey, hang on a minute, what's happened here? That shouldn't have happened. Updates to standards typically are a 3-year cycle. What happens is usually 5 years after a standard is published, it's then reviewed as to whether you want to maintain it as it is, revise it, or withdraw it. It's cancelled. It should not be used again. If you maintain it, it's not changed. If there's enough votes and people volunteer to do the work, it then goes into a review process. And again, that's typically a 3-year cycle, of which the first 18 months are actually making the changes, and the second half is the ballots and circulating it around. So at each level, it's national votes that matter. And, as I said earlier in my talk, I would encourage those that have the ability, consider looking at how you contribute to the international standards. National standards are fine, but actually having them that will work at international level are even better, especially where organisations are wanting to work in that international domain.
Good, thank you. In this context, one more observation I have is, if you look at the early phase, when automotive functional safety standard 2622 was under development, security considerations came at a later time, and I found that took a faster route. Now there is a regulation, right? Safety is still not fully mandated. Security took a upper hand, even though it came later. And that tendency will continue, especially after last week, issue which the whole world got alerted. I'm sure more and more governments will step up in the security line, and which is something which all of us need to keep an eye on it. And to all three of you, I have one question, a comment, probably you can add from an Indian context: developing more and more standards, adhering to standards, creating the culture of standards. What is that probably we could do? A piece of advice? Because there are a lot of people who are here, I think they all have the right capability, willingness collectively. I'm looking at, some volunteers here and there who could come forward at some point of time. It's very easy to blame others. I always say, let's put the first effort from our side so that, somebody else. Andrew, starting with you. Because you have seen a lot of work in the UK context. I know it's difficult to copy the whole thing here, but it is.
I mean, as I said, standards are there to guide. They are not to mandate. And, repeating what I said in my talk this morning, they're there to guide you, to come up with a common, agreed way of doing something between companies, suppliers, acquirers, partners, subcontractors, all of this. So everybody knows what the common goal is. So national standards are great, but as I say, international ones are better, because that then helps you play at that international market. But ultimately, the standards, while they're to guide you, as I said again, you need to apply common sense. Do not apply rigidly. Be prepared to say no to the QA manager, but to justify your position. So engage your brain and keep it engaged.
I probably look at it in a different way. First, I agree with what Andrew was saying. Just don't go by the wording of the standard and fix to it or stick to it. Understand the essence of why it is there and then what is the need for the implementation or integration of that standard into your product. That is of prime importance. Probably we are not as an industry or as a culture, it is not taken in right sense. That is how I put it from an Indian perspective. Maybe we are not very tuned to applying standards to each and every product or the products which we are manufacturing. That being said, again, nobody really stops us from implementing or changing the way we work. It's not always a mandate to stick to what you have been doing all the while, but instead putting it into a different perspective, thinking differently, like Srinivas was saying. We might not have thought about a security concern or an issue 10 years back when the product was manufactured. But at this point of time, it has become vulnerable. So until and unless we change it, and as Andrew was rightly pointing it out, probably the life cycle of the standard, once it goes through the entire process and comes into us itself, is 5 years. By the time, many of the changes might have already happened and then creeped into the system, which might have created a security threat. So it's not always really acceptable to go word by word on a standard, rather than stick to your common sense, understand it, and then implement it in a better way so that it gives the functional result as desired.
This is why more standards are now looking at being principle-based. They tell you the aims and the objectives of what they're trying to do. They're not being prescriptive and tell you exactly how you do it. So, that allows for the fact that it takes a long time to update the standard, but in the interim, you can tailor it according to your local needs.
Srinivas,
And
please.
And that being said, again, in the Indian context, everybody who is scrutinizing it will go word by word against the standard. If you're not following it, then you're not going to be certified for it. That's again a problem for the suppliers and the product manufacturers.
Yeah.
You have to come out of that, basically.
Yeah, it's QA by tick box, and that's what we must avoid.
I take this in two parts. I think the first one is on the cycle of the standards, right? So they do change, and I've seen the telecommunication system that we built in the past. They were catching up with the standards, but no standards overrides the previous standards. It's always evolutionary and it's incremental. So the product that you build for a particular standard would not be a throwaway. Even if the next standard comes in the next cycle, you may have to enhance more, add more, or same code base or rephase it. But the development, the first standard cycle I've seen in telecommunication was about 5 years, CPCI. And then the next standard came in and it took only 2 years to fit to that. So the life cycles drops it. It's a follow-up on that standard cycle. Onto the second one, I think no companies will try to make products for standards. I want to make a product so that I'll fit to that standard. No. They'll make a product for particular use cases, particular solution that they want to solve the world. And in doing that, I have to face with the competition. If my competition is standardized, they're going with some kind of better processes, both development process and the functionality safety processes. And I develop better use cases, agree. But if it's going to mission critical, someone wants to put it in rocket, someone put it in autonomous, the decision makers of the solution side will always question, should I trust you? Should I trust the other guy who is now authorized to a standard? No, it is more of a compulsion for the companies to catch up on the standard race. And in India, I've seen the last 10 years, 15 years, the buzz is quite a bit moved. The 10 years back, talking about ISO 2626, 903 was very small. CMMI standard was probably service companies were talking about, okay, can I make this standard so that I'll get the contracts? But now the buzz is a lot more. With artificial intelligence coming up and devices are more smarter, and your autonomous stuff, that autonomous vehicles and autonomous intelligence is built in. Standards is the way to distinguish your products with the competition. So India market is catching up a lot. There's a lot of emphasis is made to implement your products for higher standards comply with the standards and enhance your quality.
Yeah, to some extent, I think the consumer mindset also makes a difference. Okay, last year, we have a statistics in India, car buying behavior. First time, the first buying parameter has become safety. Otherwise, it used to be mileage and price. Okay, that is a changing phase of this country, and I'm sure more and more. They owe a big clap. They did a fantastic job. Please join me to thank them.